A dog learns through repetition that pretending to find something fascinating by the back door reliably draws their owner away from the kitchen counter where an unguarded sandwich is sitting. Another dog, in a multi-dog household, appears to fake disinterest in a buried toy whenever a more dominant housemate is watching, only returning to retrieve it once the other dog has wandered away. These behaviors sound almost too calculated to be real, the kind of thing dog owners describe anecdotally and other people politely doubt. But a specific line of research into what scientists call tactical deception in dogs has taken these claims seriously enough to design controlled experiments around them, and the results complicate any simple assumption that dogs are incapable of strategic, intentional misdirection. Welcome to Hidden Paw Signals. I want to begin the way I always do. Everything you hear on this channel comes from my own personal process of reading, studying, and trying to understand the published science behind dog behavior. I am not a veterinarian, a researcher, or a certified animal behaviorist. This is one person's learning journey through the world of canine cognition, shared with you because the findings genuinely changed how I see my own dog. It is educational content only and is not veterinary or medical advice. If your dog shows behavior you find confusing or concerning, particularly around resource guarding, food-related anxiety, or significant behavioral changes, please consult your local veterinarian or a certified professional dog trainer who can assess your individual dog's specific situation directly. The most direct experimental work on this question comes from researchers including Marianne Heberlein and Dennis Turner at the University of Zurich, who designed a series of studies specifically testing whether dogs would adjust their behavior strategically based on which humans had previously proven cooperative versus competitive in a resource-sharing context, and whether dogs could learn to mislead a human competitor about the location of a hidden food reward. In one key experimental design, dogs were trained in a scenario where a cooperative human partner always shared found food with the dog, while a competitive human partner kept any food the dog led them to for themselves. After this learning phase, dogs were tested on whether they would lead the cooperative partner toward a hidden food reward more readily and directly than they would lead the competitive partner. What Heberlein and Turner's research found was that dogs did adjust their behavior based on this learned distinction, showing a clear preference for leading the cooperative partner to the food location more directly and consistently, while showing more hesitant, indirect, or delayed behavior when paired with the partner who had previously kept food for themselves rather than sharing it. This demonstrated that dogs are capable of tracking the outcomes of past interactions with specific individuals and adjusting their own subsequent behavior strategically based on that history, a foundational requirement for the kind of social reasoning that underlies more complex deceptive behavior. A particularly compelling extension of this research examined whether dogs could go a step further, not simply withholding cooperation from an unreliable partner, but actively providing misleading information. In follow-up experimental designs building on this foundation, researchers tested scenarios in which dogs had the opportunity to lead a human toward either an empty container or a container with food, with the human's subsequent behavior, sharing or not sharing, determined by which container the dog led them to. Dogs in these studies showed evidence of learning to preferentially lead the non-sharing, competitive human toward the empty container rather than the one containing the reward, behavior consistent with a rudimentary form of intentional misdirection, since leading the competitive partner away from the actual food increased the dog's own chances of accessing or retaining that resource later. It is important to be precise about what this research does and does not establish, because the word deception carries significant cognitive weight, implying an understanding of another mind's beliefs that can be manipulated, a capacity called theory of mind that remains genuinely debated in canine cognition research. What these studies more conservatively demonstrate is that dogs are capable of tracking the outcomes of past interactions with specific individuals and adjusting their own subsequent behavior in ways that functionally produce misleading outcomes for an unreliable social partner. Whether this reflects a genuine understanding that the human holds a false belief that the dog is actively trying to create, the strict definition of deception in cognitive science, or a simpler form of learned behavioral adjustment based on associative outcomes, remains an active and genuinely unresolved question among researchers in this field. Before we continue, an important pause. As always, what I share here is my own personal reading of published research and is offered for education only, not professional advice. It is not veterinary guidance. If your dog shows behavior you find confusing or concerning, particularly around resource guarding, food-related anxiety, or significant behavioral changes, please consult your local veterinarian or a certified professional dog trainer who can assess your individual dog's specific situation directly. Additional research from other labs has examined related questions using different experimental paradigms, including studies on whether dogs alter their behavior around food or toys, depending on whether a human or another dog can see them, a capacity sometimes referred to as behaving differently under observation versus when seemingly unobserved. Several studies have found that dogs are more likely to take a forbidden item, such as food they have been told not to touch, when the lighting in the room is dim, or when the human present has their back turned or eyes closed, compared to when the human is clearly watching in good lighting. This sensitivity to what a human can or cannot currently perceive is considered a meaningful, if more basic, building block toward the kind of perspective tracking that more complex deception would require, even if it falls short of demonstrating full theory of mind on its own. What makes this area of research particularly interesting is how it intersects with what we know about dogs' close behavioral cousins, wolves, who show comparatively less of this strategic, human-directed behavioral adjustment in equivalent experimental designs. Likely because wolves have not undergone the same evolutionary pressure to closely track and strategically respond to specific human individuals across repeated interactions. This pattern suggests that whatever capacity for strategic social adjustment dogs display, including the behaviors that border on tactical deception, appears to be specifically tied to the domestication process and the unique cognitive demands of a species that has spent thousands of years needing to read, predict, and sometimes strategically navigate the behavior of the humans they depend on. There is a practical dimension to this research that many multi-dog or multi-pet households will recognize immediately. The anecdotal behaviors that prompted this research in the first place, a dog appearing to fake disinterest in a resource while a competitor is watching, a dog learning which family member is more likely to share food and directing their begging behavior accordingly, fit naturally within the broader experimental findings. Your dog is very plausibly tracking across the whole history of your relationship a running account of which behaviors toward which specific people and animals in their environment have produced favorable outcomes, and adjusting their strategic behavior, including occasionally misleading behavior, accordingly. What I find genuinely thought-provoking about this research, in my own process of working through it, is how it sits at the edge of what we are currently able to determine scientifically. The evidence for strategic, outcome-tracking behavioral adjustment in dogs is solid and well replicated. The deeper question of whether this reflects something resembling genuine intentional deception, requiring an understanding of what another mind believes, remains a genuinely open frontier in animal cognition science, one that researchers, including those at Zurich, continue to investigate using increasingly sophisticated experimental designs. What is already clear is that the social intelligence operating behind your dog's eyes during everyday interactions with you and with other animals in your household is considerably more calculating in the most literal sense than most owners ever suspect. As I always want to close with, everything shared here is part of my own learning process and is offered for education and reflection only. It is not professional veterinary or behavioral advice. If you have any concern about your dog's health or behavior, please consult a qualified local veterinarian who knows your individual dog. No video can replace that relationship. What I find most valuable about engaging with this research in my own ongoing process of learning is how it pushes back gently against the temptation to either overestimate or dismiss the inner life of dogs entirely. The careful, conservative language researchers use, strategic behavioral adjustment, rather than confidently asserting full deceptive intent, models a kind of intellectual honesty worth carrying into how we think about our own dogs day to day. The evidence clearly shows a level of social calculation most people never suspected. It also responsibly stops short of claims the data cannot yet fully support, leaving open one of the more genuinely fascinating unanswered questions in the entire field of animal cognition science. There is also a useful comparative angle worth considering here, drawing on research examining similar strategic partner tracking behavior in other social species. Comparable experimental paradigms testing strategic behavioral adjustment based on a partner's prior cooperative or competitive history have been used with primates, corvids such as ravens and crows, and certain other highly social mammals, with dogs generally performing at a level broadly comparable to species long recognized for sophisticated social cognition. This places dogs within a relatively select group of species for which controlled experimental evidence supports genuine strategic behavioral adjustment based on tracked social history, reinforcing the broader scientific picture of dogs as considerably more socially sophisticated than the simpler associative learning models that dominated earlier behavioral science once assumed. It is also worth noting the methodological care researchers in this field take to rule out simpler explanations before describing a behavior as evidence of strategic or deceptive capacity. Before concluding that dogs were genuinely tracking and responding to partner reliability, researchers in the Zurich studies and related work systematically tested and excluded alternative explanations, including the possibility that dogs were simply responding to incidental differences in handler behavior unrelated to the cooperative or competitive manipulation itself. This rigorous process of ruling out simpler explanations is part of why findings in this specific area of canine cognition research are considered relatively robust and have continued to hold up well across multiple independent replications conducted by different research groups using varied experimental designs. If this gave you a new way to think about your dog's social behavior, share it with someone whose dog seems suspiciously strategic around food or toys. Leave a comment below. Has your dog ever seemed to deliberately mislead you or another pet? I want to hear that story. Subscribe if you have not already, and I'll see you on the next Hidden Paw Signals. The voice and visuals in this video were created using artificial intelligence. Thank you for watching Hidden Paw Signals.